Welcome back to Sikistan, and today we're reacting to definitely one of my favorite, if not my favorite, MMA fighter ever, Bas Rutten. Not Bas, as they say. It's very important.
I call him Bas, but it is Bas.
It's Bas Rutten, yeah, from Netherlands. Pancreas, first UFC heavyweight champion. Everyone, if you clicked on this, you know who Bas Rutten is. Today we're reacting to a video where he talks about how he got his cardio for some of the longer fights for Pancreas. So it's a quick little clip on a podcast on an actor that was on The Longest Yard, if you're trying to think of where you saw him from. I'm not sure of his name, but he had a video and he's talking about this. So basically what he did was 1 minute on, 1 minute off for like 15 minutes of sparring. So he had sparring, did some combinations for a minute, rested for a minute, and then once he could get to the 15 minutes of that without, I suppose, when he could get to that with still quality movement, he would then increase the time he was punching for by 5 seconds, and then this would correspondingly reduce his rest time by 5 seconds. So you do a minute on, then it would be a minute and 5 seconds, so he'd rest for 55 seconds, do punches for a minute and 5 seconds, rest for 55 seconds. Next week, I assume then he would go to a minute and 10 seconds, and then rest for 50 seconds, and so on and so forth. So there's a couple of things about this that are quite good, and then there's other stuff that for him it probably worked fine, but for you, if you're not careful, it could be very, very detrimental.
If you start 10 weeks out, then I'll go 1 minute rounds. And once I can complete all the 10 rounds full power, I go to 1 minute and 5 seconds. And I'll take 55 seconds rest. So 5 second increase, 5 second decrease from resting time. And then every week I go 5 seconds more. And suddenly you're at 1.5 minutes throwing out a crazy amount of energy and you do this 30 minutes with only 30 seconds rest. Now people go, what's that going to do? Look at any boxing fight or any other fight where somebody unloads on the opponent for 20 seconds and they can't put him away. Now they're out of gas. Mm-hmm. Well, I can do this for 1.5 minutes, full blast, and I can do this 15 times in a row.
First thing we want to talk about is this is phenomenal in terms of it has some form of progression. So really important, what we often see with people's downfall in conditioning, especially for mixed martial arts and fighting, is that people just go ham as like hard as fucking possible in their conditioning and have no sense or reason, no form of progression, no form of programming in their conditioning. It's still something that needs to be programmed correctly. You still need to put in forms of overload. You still need to do this in an intelligent manner. So what I like about this is that he is very definitively has some form of progression, some way of pushing himself. Not crazy. Rarely with conditioning do you ever want to push more than even like 10% more than the previous week is a lot to push by your conditioning, especially if things are getting longer distances. So he's going very, very small amounts each week, and then he has some form of quality control, but this might be where you might downfall as an individual if you don't have a coach watching you and you're not that experienced. So obviously Bas Rutten is an incredibly experienced fighter, and he knows and understands, like he says in the clip, he says I'm very, very explosive and I can keep going if I need to. So what you need to watch out for if you're using this form of progression is that it's very, very easy for anyone who's done sparring. You'll know if you're doing a long distance sparring. You'll start off at the start, you'll come out of the gates as hard as you possibly can, punches explosive, you look great, you think you're Mike Tyson in your head, you're Bas Rutten. And then after like 2 or 3 minutes, your punches start going like this, and you're just waiting, the instructor looks, and you kind of, your weighty looks away, and then you're going back to just tapping the bag with limp wrists. You know, that's terrible, you know you shouldn't be doing it. So the issue with this is we don't really have any form of quality control, and it might be just too intense. So the problem with this is not so much that you don't have good quality punches. It may be that the barrier for entry for this is that you need a certain level of pretty high aerobic or cardiovascular endurance before you can even attempt this style of cardiovascular training. So this would be more in the realms of sport-specific training, which is not something you would always delve into, but it's specifically using this for cardiovascular training. So this wouldn't be for someone who is relatively unfit. You'd want to be in quite good shape. You don't have the capacity to go for 15 minutes quite hard on something like an assault bike or a rower before you'd really get any benefit from this. Because we know, and we always talk about this, punching slow or doing any of your sport-specific movements slow does not compensate and give you faster speed later. All it does is it makes you end up being slower. It trains you to be slow.
On the next point, and probably the most interesting thing from my point of view from this video, is the kind of psychological element to this. So Bas is a fucking machine. If ye haven't watched every single thing about Bas Rutten or Bas Rutten up to this point, go and watch it. So like he talks about learning to love the conditioning piece, and this is something we come up against all the time, right? So you've got people, even the beasts at conditioning, even the people who are in phenomenal condition, when you start off, you don't love it. And people have this issue, like, especially powerlifters, weightlifters, strength sport athletes in general, you get them to go into conditioning block and they struggle very, very, very quickly. Firstly, they don't want to do it because it's not the sport they want to do. They hate doing it. They struggle a lot when they do it. And when they look at people who are really good, they say, fuck it, he's struggling, but he's not. He doesn't look as bad as I look when I do it. It's really, really important that you have to understand everyone sucks when they started this. And you have to learn not only kind of how to do the movements, how to recover from the movements, get fitter as you go through, but more importantly than any of that, Bas talks about learning to love this. Like, learning to love that struggle is so utterly important to becoming an athlete. So much of just good general athletic performance is being able to put your head down, grind your teeth, and just go for it when you need to actually go for it. The second most interesting thing for this is a lot of people, once they reach this level of loving that suffering, loving that pain, being able to go to the pain cave or going that extra step, it becomes an issue after a while. And Bas actually correctly mentions that as, like, he recognized how much of an issue that was. He was able to kill himself in every single session. He then obviously wouldn't get better because he's just constantly killing himself. He's not actually seeking any progression. And that was the kind of most second interesting thing from this, is that if you're murdering yourself every time, so you've done all the work to get good at kind of like loving that pain, loving the suffering, going and training hard consistently, you then need to be able to pull the reins back. And it is like the Jordan Peterson thing of, like, should you be a bitch or should you be some kind of fucking monster? You should obviously be a monster and be able to control it. In the case of this, should you be super conservative with your training or should you be a fucking lunatic with your training? To be honest, I think you should be a fucking lunatic, but be able to control it and have those systems in place, whether that be a coach, a program you'll stick to, a high level of adherence with to yourself, that you say, I can go to that place, but I'm not going to go there right now.
If you do need some strength training from programming for your MMA, for your combat sports, we have a 10-week program, 6 weeks strength training, and then 10 weeks of power development, or more geared towards power development in the last. There's no gear with the program in the last 4 weeks. There's no conditioning in the program, but actually, if you would like some conditioning program, I'm sure Fitz could put something together. But if not, the strength for combat sports athletes will do you very, very well. We're having a lot of people running it, and they're having a great time doing it, and they're enjoying it. It's a consistent plan. It'll make you as strong as you need to be if you run that once or twice, as you need to be for a fighter, cold-blooded killer, arsonist.